welcome.
Excuse me. Your mic? No.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
So, we have pretty good agenda today. Our moderator Geetha is coming in a few minutes. She's going to moderate this panel. As you, some of you know, probably she's our advisor as well for the Meetup. And Pillsbury lawyer Justin Hobie is going to give us some nuggets for entrepreneurs talk, about 5 to 7 minutes, end of a discussion here. And then we'll have some time after the meetup, after the panel discussion for networking. This is the problem. I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do this here. This is the problem I had last time. So here's our meetup schedule for the year. For May meetup is supposed to be in Palo Alto, but as some of you remember, we've been talking about doing some events with other groups are interested in similar subject matter. So we might do this May meetup with a group called Pharma. They're doing a demo day, and we might do this. Only thing that they're located in San Francisco. So no decision is made yet. We are discussing, but I'm just letting you know that this event might be in San Francisco. Thank you, our volunteers and sponsors. Let's give applause for our volunteers and thank you, Pillsbury. So, we all do IT, right? Still, what is the problem? There's no IT when you were going to the check into a emergency room or something. I just want to see why that's still happening. Why we are still not connected. And one day there might be one pill that's loaded with everything, so we don't have to take, so many pills for so many things. So with this, we'll have an announcement. You're going to load your files right now, probably. And any group announcement? Anybody has any announcements for events, hiring people? Anybody got funding? Anything?
I'm looking for money.
Okay. You say anything?
No.
Okay, for money. Okay, good. Okay, you want to come here?
Sure, thank you.
This is Justin Hobie. You can.
I'll maybe try with the mic without. Hi, my name is Justin Hobie. I'm a partner here at Pillsbury. I do a lot of work with startup companies, and I thought I would offer you some nuggets of advice, I'll just use that, for entrepreneurs that are thinking about starting a company or have started a company. I'm not going to talk about legal stuff because that's just profoundly boring, believe me. Okay? This is really meant to be like nice, crystallized advice to you, and hopefully it'll resonate with you. Although if you're like many of my clients, you'll just disregard everything I tell you. So here are the 5 nuggets. 1, be religious about your equity. I'll go into each of these. Be religious about your equity. Protect your IP. Avoid tattoos. And that doesn't mean tattoos on your body. That's for someone else to advise you on. I'm talking about legal tattoos. Resolve all disputes that you have and keep things simple. So let me drill down on these. On your equity, the one thing you need to be clear about if you're starting a company is to have absolute crystal clear records. You can't mess it up. When you're dealing with your equity, don't talk fast and loose. Don't send out random emails and pick up Winklevoss twin problem. Okay? Don't talk in percentages. Oh, I'll give you 5%. 5% of what? You don't know what that is. It could be a percentage of anything. Only talk in exact share amounts. Let me just pause here. If you're dealing with your equity, your spider senses should tingle. Call your lawyer to make sure you're doing it right. You don't know how to do it. It's not rocket science, but it's nuanced. You don't want to mess this part up. Here's something I find a lot of my startup clients doing. Resist the urge to use equity as currency for commercial deals. I have a lot of health tech clients that have wireframed out some app. They're going to put it on iOS, but they don't know how to develop it, so they outsource the work to a developer. They got zero cash, so guess what they do? I'll give you 5% of the company. And I'll give it to you if you hit this milestone, I'll give you this percent, this milestone, this percent, and there's inevitably a dispute, which will be the subject of a later slide. You are creating a problem. Cap table problems will kill deals. If your goal in life is to get acquired, okay, and to have some FU money and sit around and watch reruns of Oprah, okay, that's your goal, then don't mess up your cap table, because I do so much M&A that I can tell you the one thing that will kill a deal is if you have lack of clarity on your cap table. A couple side notes. Avoid the noise of crowd-funded financings. Really bad idea, okay? They sound sexy, they're not. And finally, it's not really related to this, but just incorporate in Delaware. And for those of you that are trying to seek financing now, I suggest you talk to people in the pharmaceutical industry here and get some Ativan, because it's a painful process. Protecting your IP. Anyone who touches your IP has to sign an agreement. Employees, consultants, advisors. See this bottom one? Hackathons cause IP headaches. There might be some people here that do hackathons. I call those hackathon hangovers. If people create projects, turn the lights on, the roaches run out of the room. Who owns this stuff? Okay, so be aware of that at hackathons. Read the fine print when you're outsourcing your IP to someone, one of these developers. You know what it's going to say? It says, you own the IP after you pay me everything that's due. Okay, well what does that mean? What if there's some dispute? Now they can hold you hostage. So be really careful about those. The next point is, and I do a lot of work for big companies, big evil companies. Okay, and we draft agreements that we have people to sign. Take my word for it, you should be scared of those agreements. Okay? And you should be especially scared insofar as the IP provisions are involved. So pick your fights on those, and if there's one thing you're going to do with a big company, those are the fights to have. Everything else you're probably going to have to K1. Avoid tattoos. What do I mean by a tattoo? Long-term perpetual deals, exclusive licenses, agreements where you're not going to, you're doing a deal with someone and they say, great, I want to work with you, but you can't work for my competitors for a couple of years. You've got to be wary of these kind of provisions. Rev share is another classic. I'm going to give you 5% of a rev share because I don't want to give you my equity and I don't have any cash to give you. Here's what you have to ask yourself. I'm okay with this. I'm okay not competing with these people. I'm okay with the rev share. But what about the person acquiring you? Are they going to be okay with that? So everything you do, you should view through the prism of being acquired. What would an acquirer think about this? Okay? And guess what investors think about? Investors think about what acquirers think about. So if they see these things, guess what? You're not going to get any money from them until you take care of it. And you try to go and fix these things or terminate them after the fact when you're in the point of getting acquired, guess what the person that you're asking that to is going to say? They're going to be very happy. Give me a lot of money. Or no. Right? So try to avoid these things. If you can't, there's ways to nuance them. Nothing's binary. But just be aware that you're doing it when you're doing it. Disputes. Disputes happen all the time for my startup clients. They come from employees, contractors, especially contractors. Milestone-based projects are the worst. Because, here's what I want. It's in my brain. Create what I want. And they're thinking, well, I don't know what it is you want, but let's just go ahead. And you go further and further down, and there's just a dispute. Shareholders and founders also have, typically have disputes. First thing to note, you have no money, so you're not going to win, ever. You don't have money to pay a lawyer to go argue in front of some judge with a wig on, saying, here's the email. This proves that I'm right. You don't even have the money to get to that forum. So you've already lost with the dispute, okay? The next thing you have to understand is this hurts about what I'm about to say. You don't have monopoly on the truth, okay? Your version of reality is very true to you, but they have their own version of reality. And guess what? In every dispute, everyone has facts and emails that they can use to support their version of reality. You have to understand that. So what do? Take the high ground. Act professionally. Don't go to the lowest common denominator and send out the nasty grand email. If you need to do that, send it to me. Just send it out. Send it to your lawyer, and I'll say, okay, you feel better now? Okay, don't send it to them. Always act professionally. You'll never regret that. Okay? If you're having a hard time bridging the resolution with the person, go to a third-party advisor that you both trust and have them broker a deal. Okay? But the key is you have to resolve it. If you take the ostrich approach and try to ignore it, if you're dealing with the Winklevoss twins, or you're dealing with someone who claims they have a rev share, and you say, well, I don't care, I'm going to go bankrupt, so what do I care? Well, again, when things are going well and you're going to get an investment or acquired, and you go back to them and say, I know you think you own 30% of the company, but I'm about to be acquired. Can you just say that you don't own anything? And my guess is you could probably figure out what the answer to that one is going to be. Finally, keep things simple. This is really hard. It's really hard. In my experience, the size of the deals is typically inversely proportional to the complexity of the deals. You do deals for like $3 billion, guess what it says? I'm going to buy your shares for $38 a share. There you go. That's what it says. You do a deal for $300,000, the person wants to just make it complicated. I know, it's just something, part of being a human being. You're trying to compensate for doing something small, you want to make it more important. So you do earn-outs and these rev shares. All that stuff is really easy to talk about. Oh yeah, we'll do an earn-out. It'll be based on this. And then when you drill down, it's not that easy to draft. Read, it's expensive to draft. It's not, so you've got to keep things simple. And the final thing is no one has a crystal ball. So if you try to make things complicated, it's always going to have unintended consequences. You're going to pivot, you're going to do other things, and now you have this obligation on paper that doesn't map to your reality. And then we go back up to the slide before this, which is a dispute, which you want to avoid. So those are the kind of things, those are the 5 nuggets of advice. I will say if you're out there raising money, what I tell my clients is if you're operating your business, make sure you're wearing your rose-colored glasses, right? You're going to save the world. But when you're raising money, put on your sunglasses, because it is the world of have and have-nots. And I think when you're following your Twitter feed and you're seeing all these major raises by these companies, there's a natural inclination to align yourself. Oh, if they're getting it, I'm going to get it. Believe me, and take comfort in this, you're in a good company with a lot of companies that are struggling to raise money right now. If you are going to try to raise money, remember, raising money is not easily multitasked with operating your business. 2 totally different skill sets. So if you have multiple founders, make one founder in charge of that. Okay? Let them take the brunt and all the misery. You focus on the business. Okay? Be there as a sounding board and all that. But prepare yourself for disappointment. Okay? So anything that happens is good news. So the bad news doesn't follow you back in with your co-founders and follow you back into your personal relationships. And just know if you keep plugging through, you will get money eventually. I can tell you that. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much for letting me talk to you.
Please take a seat, all the panelists. And Rhonda and Louis, our programming team, arranged this meeting. Really nice meeting for us. So Louis is going to introduce the panel.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Let's get started here. Apologize for the little delay while we get the slide materials in here. My name is Geetha Rao. I don't know if Pranay, you've had a chance to introduce all of us, or? Okay, good.
Sorry about the delay, everybody. Thanks. That's okay. I don't need a microphone. Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for showing up. This is a great turnout. As I said, if any of you were here last month in Palo Alto, I said that I'd look over everybody's suggestions, and this meetup is definitely an outshoot of those suggestions. I just wanted to briefly give some context to what we're going to be talking about tonight from a real-world perspective. My very short career as a doctor, I really was a lot of problems in terms of patient care. It boils down to the pharmaceuticals that we administer. I just wanted to go over some just basic facts about the problems that are inherent in giving prescription medicine. Let's see. So I first just like to say, gone are the days of take 2 of these and call me in the morning. Doctors don't get paid for phone calls; they don't really want to talk. I'm just joking there. In terms of, there are about 4 billion prescriptions written in 2010. That was the last year I could find data. Over 24,000 prescriptions and over-the-counter drugs are available today. Far cry from the days of digitalis, aspirin, nitroglycerin, and morphine. According to the World Health Organization, only 50% of patients in developed countries, that's countries like us, actually follow treatment recommendations. In 2006, it turns out that prescription errors injure at least 1.5 million patients a year at a cost of approximately $3.5 billion. An analysis of 200,000 electronic prescriptions found that 20% of all of these prescriptions don't actually even get filled. The reasons that people give for not filling prescriptions are cost, desire to try alternative treatments, fear of side effects, inconvenience and complexity of dosing regimen, and patient doubt about needing medication in the first place. Denial is not just a river in Egypt. According to CDC, well, these are just some other facts. What I wanted to point out was that 40% of older people use 5 or more prescription medications in the last month, and that basically the use of prescription drugs has just been going up dramatically, even in just the past 10 years. This is just a list of the top 10 most prescribed drugs in 2010. It's pretty scary, but hydrocodone, 131 million prescriptions, probably half of them are coming out of one pharmacy in California. So, as looking as a physician, this is how we have a very distinguished panel here tonight of people that I believe are at the forefront of solving a lot of these major issues. First, we need to reduce prescription errors, increase compliance, reduce drug-seeking behavior and prescription drug abuse, better monitor side effects, custom-tailored drugs to the individual. It's no longer one-size-fits-all, because obviously those aren't optimal in a lot of cases. Better manage polypharmacy and drug-drug interactions, reining in prescription drug costs while still promoting new drug development, and further develop evidence-based prescription models using as much level 1 evidence as possible to randomize clinical trials. Unfortunately, these are expensive, and there's not a whole lot in it for the drug companies who are the people who have the money to do this. And finally, we need to address problems with expired and counterfeit drugs, drug disposal, and accidental poisons. And if anyone wants to develop new antibiotics, that would be really awesome as well. So I'll hand it over to Geetha now. Let's see here.
All right, thank you. So you're going to be my clicker out of here. Okay. So Louis gave us a physician's perspective over here, and We have a panel that represents a variety of different perspectives, but none of them actually represent the patient's perspective as much directly, or they're not coming from there. So I thought I'd just start off with a very brief overview of what it looks like, or what it's looked like for the patient. And I wanted to just sort of take us back in time and kind of ramp up to Pharma 2.0. So real quickly, when I was a child, you went to the doctor's office and you took a bottle. There was something called a dispensary. I grew up in rural India, and you went to the dispensary with a prescription, which was written on a piece of paper, and you brought your own bottle from home. And the dispenser would look at the bottle and judge the cross-sectional area, and had a bunch of paper tape with little notches on it. And he would pick the right kind of tape and tape it onto this bottle. And he'd fill in whatever the liquid prescription was in it. He would compound it right there. He was called a compounder, that's what he was called. And he would put it in, and then he told you, take one notch, 3 times a day. So that's how it really worked. So just as in this picture, you didn't have these high-tech tools, but you had the prescription, you had the actual compounding recipe, and you put it all together. Then we got to a few standardized ingredients, a few other tools, and the pharmacists started to, put things together, and maybe they experimented a bit on the side, we didn't know. Then we have standard drugs, pre-formulated, and a series of them sitting out there on the shelf, and you pick them. And in terms of the kind of interaction with the patient, basically the pharmacist came up to you at the time of dispensing, and if you wanted advice, he or she might give you some advice. So it was an as-needed advice on as-needed basis, and it was essentially formulary drugs of some kind, of pre-formulated drugs, more or less. Then they started to take it on the phone. That was the first step up, and then we're starting to ramp up, and now you can dial in from home and figure out what's going on with your prescription. And now we're about to launch into the modern era, and the panelists here are going to tell us about it. So I thought I would follow the supply chain over here. Let me start with Scarlett. I'll have you have a presentation? Okay, great. So let's start with Scarlett's presentation. Scarlett is from UCSF, and they have a robotic pharmacy. And it sounds terribly exciting here. I saw a news release about a year ago on this. Yeah. So take it away.
Is this on? I talk loud. Can you guys hear me in the back? Okay, good.
Yep.
No, it's okay. I'm the assistant director for pharmacy operations at Mission Bay. I actually designed and built the robotic pharmacy that we have. From our pharmacy, we do inpatient dispensing. We don't do any outpatient dispensing, so I can't really speak to that. I know about it, but I can't speak to it very readily here tonight. By bringing in the robotic equipment, this first picture, these first few are our IV robot. So once the robot is trained, there's a lot of work that goes into it. You calibrate everything, you test everything out as far as density and size of the vials. I can't even go through all of it, it'd take too long. Then you train it in the robot. Once it's trained in the robot, it will always be made exactly the same. If you ask me to make something, today I make it this way, tomorrow I make it that way. Not that there's anything wrong going left to right or right to left, but I might forget. And if I haven't made it for a year, I'm going to have to look it up to know how to make it again. She never forgets. And they're girls, by the way, because when they decide not to work, they don't do anything. They're very smart. I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay. We also, this is a semi-automated piece of equipment. We had this specially designed. I worked with the company that actually developed this for us. It will draw oral syringes, which is something that is not in the industry right now. We have to make a lot of oral syringes because we have pediatric patients, so we have to make dose-specific size syringes. And someone sitting here all day long doing this gets very tiresome. This machine will do it for us. It will just actually draw the syringe. It's very nice. Next slide. Yeah. This system is 2 pieces. The very back, big long white box, looks like a semi-truck without wheels on it. It's an inventory system. It has all the drugs stored within boxes, and it brings it to you based on barcoding or asking for a specific product. It eliminates the ability for the technician to accidentally grab the wrong product because they're just pulling out of bins or putting stuff away. It also controls everything by lot number and expiration date. So I don't know how many of you are aware of all the recalled products we have been getting lately, but we can not only go in and retrieve the recalled product out of the system very readily, once we put that lot number in, we can never put it back in the system. So a few years back, there was a huge recall on heparin. A lot of hospitals ended up having heparin in their facility that was recalled, not because they didn't take it out, but because the wholesaler accidentally sent it out, and it got put back on the shelf, because as a human, I can't remember that 20-digit number when I bring the product in, so it got put back on the shelf. The robot will remember it. I put that lot number in, it'll block me from putting it back in the system. This equipment right here, this is a packager. It not only packages, all of our unit does tablets, capsules, oral syringes, suppositories, injectables, vials, everything that we would want, we can put it in here. It loads it in, it knows the expiration dates, lot numbers, all that. And then when our patient's orders come through, it automatically picks the products to go for the patient based on the time of day in generic order and lists it for the nurse to be able to administer. Everything's barcode scanned in and out. Patient meds are barcode at the time of administration. Since we've installed this piece of equipment, picking errors are a problem, always have been. Wrong doses get picked for patients all the time. We have not had this machine pick one thing wrong in over 3 million doses. You can't say that when a human's doing it. You just can't. I probably took up too much time, but
That's
it gives you kind of an overview, and we can talk more when you ask questions. I think they want to do everybody in the panel first, and then
Yeah.
do other panel questions.
Okay, yes, so let me just clarify that. We'll have each of the panelists present for a few minutes, and then 5 to 7 minutes each, and then I have a few questions for them, and then we'll take it to the audience after that.
Who's next?
Okay, so the next is, yes, Rashaun. Rashaun is here.
He's that one.
So we're following the supply chain, sort of.
So just
Yeah,
take
go.
it. So my name is Rashaun Sourles.
I apologize, I did not introduce you, yes. So,
No, that's fine.
Rashaun, CEO of a very exciting company, Needle, that just came out of one of the incubators in New York that's trying to pretend to be Silicon Valley. And,
I grew up in San Francisco, so I have a lot of love for San Francisco. I can tell you that New York is very interesting for healthcare because of the density of pharma and some of the digital players that are out there. But I'm out here pitching Hippocrates and various health company platforms, as well as pitching venture capitalists. So Geetha's right. I recently graduated from an accelerator in New York. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the accelerator model. 12 weeks. $20,000, approximately 6% of your company, and connections to the top people in your vertical. My program is called Blueprint. We're affiliated with Techstars. So Techstars found that they were rejecting a lot of healthcare companies because they couldn't add value. They're one of the most established tech accelerators. Blueprint came along, created a model under the Techstars umbrella. There's at least one mentor in the audience, Dr. Adam Schlifke from Kaiser, who made at least one trip to New York to mentor those of us that were in the inaugural class of Blueprint. So, I'm not here pitching. I like to jokingly refer to myself as a recovering drug rep. I worked for Johnson & Johnson for 7 years, and I learned all the tricks of the trade. I started in 2004, and I left in late 2010. They sent me to North Dakota to sell birth control. Trust me, as a young black recent college graduate, that was quite odd. I sold antibiotics, so I understand the need for new antibiotics. I sold Levaquin and other antibiotics. I sold narcotics. I sold a couple of devices for J&J. But what I observed occur between 2004 and 2010 was 2 shifts. The first shift was healthcare professionals were rapidly adopting digital tools to seek out answers to their questions, whereas in the past, they would have called charming guys like me to tell them their answers. And the second trend was that healthcare institutions were shutting the doors to guys like me. So there was a day I could show up in the ICU, I could wander the halls at any time of the day, I could take people out to golf and to dinner and to Hawaii. I did it all, right? Hunting cabins in North Dakota. Trust me, introducing this guy to like hunting, it was intense. The preparation was the funniest. Me at the shooting range with my buddies. At any rate, I did whatever it took to sell. But noticing those two trends, it's like, how can I continue to be effective? I work for a multi-billion-dollar drug company. We have tons of intellectual capital. We have tons of resources in the form of intellectual capital, financial capital. How can we provide value to clinicians that are seeking answers in new ways and that are shutting the doors to us? Well, before I could start to solve the problem, I just had to continue to chase my quota. And when things got really bad, I got super creative. And when basically all of my accounts had a policy where I had to get badged and credentialed, and I had to wear a badge that would turn red after 2 hours because my appointments had expired. So I got creative, and I volunteered as an orderly at 3 of those top accounts at night. Yes, in the emergency room, wheeling patients. I got to know my customers. I got to read what was on the bulletin boards. I understood the outcomes measures that you guys were seeking, and I won. I continued my sales trajectory. But there was a point where that felt icky. Like, what am I doing wearing a volunteer smock 3 nights a week? When do I get to have a life, first of all? Second of all, this is just not what I signed up for. So I left Johnson & Johnson in 2010 and founded Needle. The first, and you can click, this is geared towards investors primarily. I didn't really come with slides for this, but basically, the first iteration of Needle, which Dr. Schlipke is probably, that's what he's familiar with because he came out to New York in January, was how do we break down the walls of a hospital or a clinic and enable a healthcare provider to connect with someone in pharma? So I went back to one of my former customers and I said, if we build this private collaboration environment where you can ask questions anonymously and vendors, and through push notification, we can push your needs, your questions out to industry, would you engage with industry in that way? And the provider said, yeah, like if it were 100% pull and it was my needs and our unique patient care objectives, sure we would deal with industry, but what we hate is this constant emails and the bait and switch and the surprise guests and the pushy managers, and they don't like all that. So we launched that, and it worked really well at one hospital. I got into the Blueprint Accelerator and rapidly realized that that model wasn't scalable. Every single hospital was going to take 9 to 12 months to decide to implement our tool. But what was really interesting that we learned out of our first implementation was that 3 out of 4 questions that healthcare professionals ask can't be answered by sales reps. They need to be routed to medical affairs liaisons, clinical affairs liaisons, health economics researchers, clinical research associates. We're talking your peers in pharma, folks that you went to medical school with, pharmacy school with, who took a different path and joined pharmaceutical companies. They are the ones that are qualified to answer your unique questions. So for me, even though we thought that we were solving the problem with the tool, we realized, wait a second, technology offers more than just breaking down the walls. Technology offers clinicians the ability to connect with the brightest minds in pharma and to get all of your expert questions answered to the best of the company's ability. With some expert, one of your peers in pharma, not a guy like me or a wonderful woman that's carrying a bag in the hallway, but someone that you went to school with who may not be in your geography. The technology offers you the ability to connect with around your outcomes initiatives or a unique patient care question. And so we pivoted our platform, and that's sort of why I'm in the Valley this week, pitching WebMD and Hippocrates. We decided that instead of going hospital to hospital, why not go where healthcare professionals are going? Why not go digital? So when you are seeking answers to the questions that you have, you tend to turn to what? You turn to the journals, you turn to the librarian, you turn to a pharmacist, you turn to Hippocrates, UpToDate, Micromedics. We're talking to all of these players, and we've developed a widget. It's a feature, it's a button that can be implemented in all of those apps at the point where you have a need. And the whole focus is, if you want to elevate your information search beyond what's available in that static index, you can connect to a person in pharma who's one of your peers who can actually address your question. This is very attractive to pharma because they recognize that their sales model is failing. It's very attractive to these digital content platforms because they're looking for new revenue streams. And it's attractive to us if you can skip, John, if you can skip like 7 slides, I want to get to, I mean, this is basically, it's a question box. I'll tell you when to stop. This is it. Well, actually go 3. Go 3. Back 3? No, forward 3, I'm sorry. And then that's it. So the question box can be implemented across multiple health platforms, digital platforms. But what's unique about Needle is if you're a provider and you want an answer, you do have to tell us who you are. So some platforms have the identity of the user because you're logged in and some don't. But there's a finite number of doctors and pharmacists across the country. And you're all splitting your time between multiple health content platforms, journals, digital platforms. We're seeking to be the Q&A layer that enables you, wherever you are, to ask a question. But what we get is your questions at scale. And those questions at scale tell us a lot about what you're interested in and maybe what you want to know that you don't even know you want to know. So what we're doing is we're populating a dashboard first. We anonymize and de-identify everything about who you are as a person except for your specialty and your location. And we're able to show all of the relevant questions by keywords that are asked in apps where Needle is the engine powering the Q&A. Pharma loves this because if they're going to be more effective at serving your needs, your real-time needs, it makes more sense to look at real-time user-generated content versus IMS data telling them what prescriptions you wrote 4 months ago. In this situation right here, and then I'll wrap up, we basically showed, when I was with J&J, J&J launched a drug called Xarelto, one of the few new oral anticoagulants to be released in recent years. So we just showed an example, Xarelto and stroke. Okay, so you see a spike. Why could that have possibly spiked? Well, through our dashboard, we can show that there was actually a thought leader at Stanford. This is all hypothetical. But a thought leader at Stanford that was cited in a press report supporting the use of Xarelto. So for J&J, this tells them something. For J&J's competitors, it tells them something. But for the providers that have questions, the key is you get answers from one of your peers. And so that's what Needle is building. Very excited to be here. It feels like I've jumped a lot from chasing folks like this in a volunteer smog to sitting on a panel. So it feels like a rags to riches story for me, even though we're still in startup mode and raising money. Don't think that we've made it. But we're building an amazing team out. Esther Dyson, if any of you are familiar with, she's recently joined our board of directors and committed our first $100,000 for our 750K round. She sees this future that healthcare professionals, I mean, everyone is adopting apps, and there's really no searchability within apps. Google complains about it. They can't crawl your app behavior. When you think about a question box, what's the difference in a question box and a Google search box? They both reflect the same thing, that you want to know something and you're willing to input information. We're seeking to establish a core competency in in-app Q&A. The idea that when you're deep in an app and you have no access to the web, can we connect you to someone that will answer your question? And we're starting with healthcare because that's what I know. It's a deep pain point. I think that healthcare professionals deserve better. I think that patients deserve better. Pharma makes a lot of money, and they should be deploying their resources more effectively to serve your needs. So, thank you.
All right, well, all the best, Rashaun. All right, the next is a toss-up, so I'm going to let Nancy and Gil figure out who wants to go
Sure, we
first.
can flip.
Yeah?
Okay, head to tail. Heads.
Starting off with win.
Great, Nancy.
Okay. Oh, no.
Nancy's with Proteus, and we've had Proteus before here on our panels. They have a very interesting technology that's completely revolutionary out of the box. And that's one of the things about everybody on the panel today is none of these are incremental solutions. These are all somewhat disruptive, and they're changing the way things are being done in the pharma world. So, go Nancy.
Hi everyone, my name is Nancy Dougherty. I work at Proteus Biomedical. I didn't put my Twitter handle up there, but it's @NancyHD, so put lots of tech stuff up there. But I'm an electrical engineer, and it's kind of unique to have a hardware designer on a pharma panel, which is one of the amazing things about Silicon Valley, and it makes me very excited and happy. Please skip one slide. Cool. So I love technology. Love it. When we were talking about robots, that was fantastic. So enjoyed that quite a bit. And technology right now is really rapidly and prominently changing a lot of things about our culture. But the health field is very resistant to that change for all sorts of entrenched reasons that I'm sure are getting talked about in this group quite a bit. But I think health will be the next place to get, full technology makeover. Because electronics are at this amazing point where we can build sensors that are small, unobtrusive, wirelessly connected, and most importantly now, very cheap. So instead of relying on our traditional healthcare system, we can start to improve healthcare directly from the consumer side. So as for what I work on, I work at Proteus Biomedical. It's a startup based here in Silicon Valley, and we make medicines talk to your phone. So the heart of our technology is this tiny integrated circuit here. It's about the size of a grain of sand, and it's made completely of food materials. And we can embed the circuit inside of anything that you ingest. So right now we're putting it inside of medications. And what this lets us do is this circuit can sense what you've ingested and will tell your phone what medication you just ingested and when you took it. So we can get one more. The companion to this is a patch that you wear. It's kind of like a Band-Aid that you wear on your torso. And you just stick it on and wear it 24/7. And this Band-Aid is constantly collecting your biometric data, like heart rate, respiration, sleep stages and sleep quality, posture, activity and exercise levels. Everything that you're doing, it's reporting that. And all of this uploads automatically to a smartphone and is processed further on our servers to get more meaningful metrics out of it. So when you're using the system, you get a full picture of both your health and your health habits, and a continuous data stream showing whenever you're taking medications, all of your ingestions, as well as the biometric surroundings for them. Let's see. Maybe a little more. So this technology and a lot of technologies that are popping up like it are really making a transformation in the health field. So one for Proteus jumps right out. We can track your medication adherence, which is useful for everything from pharma R&D to consumer applications. But we can do more than that. We have a continuous stream of medication and biometric information, and we can start to answer questions like, are these medications working? Are they the right dosage? Are they adversely interacting with each other? Should you even be taking this medication? So all of this technology is changing the way that pharma needs to be done. Because old pharma was all based around statistics. If you have a problem, we're going to give you a pill. It'll either fix the problem or fix your symptoms, if you're one of the lucky percentage that it will fix it for. But with the new pharma, we're enabling systems that are personalized and use big data to get personal solutions. So you can use behavioral information, adherence information, genomic and lab data, and other sources to help treat the individual person, not the whole population. And the complement to this is systems like PillJogger, which we're going to be hearing about soon, is technology that's creating a new sort of field, encouraging people to engage in their health and form better health habits. And we can do this because now we can passively get this information. We don't require user input. We can know that you woke up, you took a walk, and you took your medications, you exercise like you're supposed to. And if your phone can know this information automatically, we can start to build apps and other systems to incentivize that sort of healthy behavior and get into the preventative side of medicine. So you can use all sorts of incentive mechanisms from games to social or even monetary rewards. So I think this will start to really drive a revolution, and it's already happening in the consumer space. Devices are being released here to help people live healthier lives, help monitor their medications better. WellnessFX now has something where you can get your blood drawn by them and analyzed on the consumer side, not even through the healthcare field, which is harder to move. But hopefully we can use this consumer revolution and start to move the traditional healthcare field to meet it and match up. That's it.
Okay.
Okay, Lewis, I've got quite a few slides, so I'll
Gil's
see
the
if I can do
CTO,
it
so we have two tech people here.
telepathic. Yes, in fact, I'm an electrical engineer too. Are there any engineers in the audience? How many people remember what a fast Fourier transform is? How many people could still do one? Good. Well, I forgot for 20 years, but I've come full circle. We actually have an application for that, which I may get to. But I saw the dark side and went into computer science, and then the really dark side and went successively into law and then business. But I'm redeeming myself as a technologist at a company that is working on, it's a venture stage startup company that is using software and software applications to encourage people, consumer-facing applications for improving adherence. Now, what does that mean? We'll work on that. Maybe you can just take a look at that. So I'm number 2 there. I'm the CTO and the JD on staff. As you may see, we have a couple physicians. Our CEO is a physician. We have a couple engineers, at least one MBA, maybe some people who aren't admitting to it. And that's more degrees than people, which is what you need in a startup company for sure. And for Pillsbury, that does not mean we're not hiring lawyers. We're all more busy than we can be. So this presentation really is geared to everyone, and I'll try to keep a little bit light on some of the things that have already been covered, because a lot of what I'm saying I think is going to be old news given the presentation so far. But as everyone knows, we do have a problem with adherence. There's an elephant in the room or a bison in the paddock here. Everyone is on medication, or at least the majority of Americans are on medications. It skews towards seniors, but even 25% almost of children, youth, are on at least one prescription medication. Many people are on 2 or more. Polypharmacy doesn't have a fixed definition, but as you can see, as we get older, we often have multiple prescription medications for multiple chronic conditions. And the problem, as we all know, is that people don't take their medications. This chart is somewhat difficult for even me to understand as often as I look at it, but if you pay attention to the blue line, there is a clinical definition of being adherent, that you're taking 80% of your medications properly. And on this particular medication study, one particular hypertensive drug, the rate dropped off from nearly 100% at the beginning to just over 20% after a year. As you can tell, it's a year, so that's a chronic condition, long-term medication. But it's even worse than that because it starts at 100, and as Lewis said, 20%, and some sources say more, don't even fill their first prescription. So there's a long-term adherence problem. And the issues that we're addressing are medications for chronic conditions. Certainly there are other problems with narcotics or with elective drugs, but the problem isn't that people aren't taking enough of it. We're talking about the major, there are 5 conditions that really are responsible for most of the issues financially, and I believe most of the deaths in America, which would be asthma, high blood pressure, congestive heart failure, diabetes, and generally high cholesterol. There are a number of others that also do that. The total cost to adherence problems in America is often given at almost $300 billion per year. I have a few bones with that figure. I think it's too high and too low at the same time, but I'll rant about that later. It's a huge problem. And that's not including the lost pharma revenues from people who don't refill or take their medications, the lost business to pharmacies, drugstores, groceries that sell medications, lost productivity, and so on. And it costs many tens of thousands of lives to people who would not necessarily die if they had stayed on the medication. Some of the answers frequently given, there are a number of hard challenges. People who don't have access to medicine, can't afford it, don't believe in the medication. Thank goodness people are addressing all of that. We're from a Silicon Valley bent, so we're going to address the low-hanging fruit, or the things that we can address that are more consumer-focused, if we can. That can be addressed through behavioral change, through interaction with devices and software and engagement systems. So I'll just show a slide here of what the hard way is. There are medical devices and studies. There's a lot of basic research that needs to be done. Not a lot of people are paying for it. It's very expensive and it's very spotty. We really don't know how people take their medications except here and there. We don't know if people are taking them at work, if they go to the bathroom to drink a liquid, if they truly are taking their medication before or after meals and so on. There's just a lot of stuff we don't need. So we're trying things the new way, things that we can address through software and design. If anyone has been on Facebook lately and has 500 friends like you, like I do, you might have seen everyone sending this Wired article to each other about A/B testing. Very interesting data-driven model. Totally interested in proof and evidence, but without a lot of attention to why. If people are eating the white ice cream cone instead of the pink one, we don't need a theory, we don't have a theory, all we know is it works. And there's a lot of new statistical stuff around multivariate testing, where you're testing a number of variables at the same time. So in this article, if you go to Amazon, you see a page. Your friend goes to Amazon, they see a slightly different page. No one is seeing the same page. Their analytics are reviewing the whole thing in real time to see what makes people buy and what makes people don't. That's one lesson. There are other lessons from advertising, from games, from marketing, where we ask people, what does it take to get people to change their minds? Why aren't they doing something? In the old version, it's why aren't they putting money in the slot machine? Why aren't they buying this product? We want to use some of those lessons and techniques to figure out why people aren't taking their medications and what we can do to help them take their medications. Our flagship product is a consumer-based app. It's on the App Store if you want to download it and take it for a spin. We have a light version that doesn't need to worry about HIPAA so far, so you won't see all of these features if you download it. But it serves as a reminder, an encourager and tracker, telling people what medicines to take and how, based on their prescriptions. So everything is connected to a server. It's in process of integrating with the pharma world, so that the patient basically has their medical regimen on their device, which reminds them and gives them a little nudge and a little encouragement and records what they're doing, which is where Proteus comes in, because at the device level, I'll go ahead and skip this one, I've already talked about that. There are a number of different things that patients need to do, repetitive health regimens, not just taking medicines, but certainly taking blood pressure, glucose level, even things like exercise and diet, eventually can be part of an entire regimen. So if we trust a patient to click, they might, that might be one of the slipping points. If there's a confirmation that they opened a pill vial or actually took their medication, then it's a different point. But we're also finding a lot of the slip-up is just human factors. The Carla, they used to talk about farfignugan, just making the whole interaction something that's natural and pleasant and encouraging. A lot of people want to take their medications, but their pill box is not in their pocket. They left it at home, or they didn't fill it, or they're taking multiple medications and they don't recognize them. So there's a lot of design that needs to be done. Fortunately, these smartphones are in most people's hands. The adoption is going way up, and for all intents and purposes, within a few years, almost everyone will have a smartphone in America. It reaches people all the way down to 3 and at all age groups, although there's obviously an adoption lag for seniors. But it doesn't even necessarily need to be a smartphone. In a few years, feature phones will all be running HTML5. We can run web apps that will achieve most of the same functionality. So if any technology can touch people, it's going to be these smart devices that everything is. And we're also reaching out on the enterprise side, as you can see in this slide, to the pharmacy world and the brand world, because ultimately, you can't charge patients to do things that are going to be better for them. If you look in the store, the pill boxes that are there are all $3, and people don't even buy them, they're still in their vials. There are a lot of people with financial stake in people changing their behavior, from employers to drug companies, pharmacies, and so on. And we're also working on devices, so if people don't make these fast enough, we'll have to make some of them. There's a need for working on dispensing devices. The final two slides are just to indicate that we have a server side that when we are ready for HIPAA and consider whether we need to go through FDA approval and so on, a provider can also see this information and tell which of their patients are compliant or not. Pharmacies are getting paid by the federal government for intervention, for example. Hospitals are potentially going to be cut off from reimbursement for readmits if it's a problem they could have been tracking. So they may want to check that their recently discharged or transitional patients are taking the medications they're supposed to. Okay, that's about it for now. I'll be around for any questions. Thanks.
Okay, well, thanks, Scarlett. So are you happy now that things are on the way to being solved? So as you know, there's an ocean of problems, and these are beacons of light in there. These are ways in which technology is getting harnessed to address specific problems. So let me start off by asking Scarlett the first question, and the others should feel free to jump in. And this is more a curiosity question on my part. How much of what you're able to do with your technology is personalizable in terms of the medications provided to patients, and how much is your technology able to follow that patient through after dispensing?
Obviously, the capsules and the tablets that are packaged up aren't personalized to the patient because they come standard from the manufacturer that way. But the oral syringe filler and the IV syringe or IV bags, those are all personal. They're down to milligrams per kilogram, nanograms per, they're very personalized, patient-specific doses. The equipment that I had only tracks it where it's dispensed and tells me where it's gone to. Then we have a hospital health system that reads the barcode when it's administered to the patient. So between the two systems, or actually 4 systems because there's 3 down in my plan, we can watch where a product goes to the patient, is administered. If it's not administered when it comes back, I can track that it came back, went out, came back, went out. So.
Okay, and most of your dispensing is in-house, so...
for us,
yeah.
all of our dispensing.
All of it's in-house. So you don't have a problem with the first part of Gilt's curve, which is people getting their medication. And you probably...
No, we still have a problem with people getting their medication. I just did, I belong to the Medication Safety Committee, and
so
one of our things that we're really working on is the fact of administration errors. And the biggest majority of administration errors in medication is the patient doesn't even get the med. The nurse might document they gave it, but I'm getting it back. If I'm getting it back, the patient could not have gotten that. So
even the pros can't get it right,
it's still a problem. Well, there's so much interruption and confusion that goes on when you're working. It's real easy to
So your adherence problem actually begins before even the patient. It starts before then.
Yep.
So let me extend that situation a little bit further. How would you see using some of the technologies you're hearing about in that system? Because you really have major infrastructure out there. And the other 3 panelists are representing, well, actually Rashaun's a little different, but we're looking at technologies that are more out in the, that they're more in the full model. So
you're looking at stuff more outside in the community.
Right. So, but but I'm asking you to think more broadly in terms of just the technology. If you had a PillJogger, or if you had a Proteus enabled medication, I don't know what the terminology is, Nancy, but Proteus inside.
The PillJogger, within the hospital, we kind of have idea of that as far as jogging your memory to take it, knowing your therapies, because we have an integrated healthcare record system. It comes up and it tells the nurse you missed these meds or whatever, but barcoding, scan them in. Still doesn't tell you whether or not it actually got stuck in the patient's mouth, or the patient actually swallowed it. That's another problem. Oftentimes we'll pocket things.
You can help with that.
Yeah. I need to know more about this because I will say when you tell me that you're going to swallow another little device and it's going to sit inside you, how long does that device stay in there? And do I really want to swallow a foreign object and have it inside my body? I like the idea that it can track all these different pieces of data that we need, but that other side kind of makes me nervous.
So Nancy, you want to respond to that? And also, I'll add a corollary question to you then is, how much are you looking at the in-hospital market?
Okay. Well, this is one of those areas where it's really important to research your market audience as well, because when I first heard about Proteus, I was so excited to eat the technology. I thought that was the coolest thing
I'm just,
Actually, not today.
not today.
I have taken several hundred of them. So, yeah, they're actually they're entirely made out of particles that you get in food. It's basically a really, really tiny multivitamin. Kind of think of it like that. So, I mean, the basis of it is just silicon, which is sand. We've been eating that since we were making bread. But as far as what we're looking to use it for, I mean, ideally, every medication ever has to have one in there. But we're partnered with pharma companies as well as consumer device companies to kind of look at both markets, both the consumer space and the behavior change, as well as the pharma side, and looking at adherence and R&D for them.
Go ahead.
So just to piggyback a little bit on the direction that you're going here, and I think it's popped up a couple of times as we've mentioned it, what is the behavior change everybody's after here that they're really focusing on? Because I think it's a little bit more than just we need an alarm because we don't remember to take our medications. There's lots of interesting data out there, and if you take a look at the whole channel, right, there's 20% of prescriptions written never make it to the pharmacy. There's an 11% abandonment rate that never get picked up once they do get to the pharmacy. So if once we start, we haven't even gotten to patient adherence yet, and we're missing 33% of our sales out of the pharma industry.
And we heard from Scarlett that happens
Right.
inside the hospital as well,
Exactly.
for all kinds of reasons.
Right. We have patients taking oral oncology drugs that are only 70% adherent. Right. Gleevec is one of those examples. Right. Where is there a more compelling story? Right. Same thing in the HIV space. Yet, on the background of some interesting studies that were done by Richard Lester in Kenya, right, a once-a-week text message, right, was enough to increase adherence to HIV medication, right, which has to be taken daily. Right? And this was actually proven through hair samples and really done to a far extent, which tells me that the connection, the accountability that you're generating between people when you have a device or an app that's really focused on the right behavior is not the alarm and the reminder, but some other level of behavior change that you're after. And whether that's accountability, whether that's some kind of engagement people feel with that, but it's something more than just, okay, I'm forgetting to take my medication.
So let me sort of pivot that to Gil here. I mean, we've got a sense of the mechanics of how your device works, or your product works, I should say, or your system, maybe that's a better term here. You want to speak a little bit to what are you trying to, what's the handle that's underlying all of this behavior or dysfunctional behavior that you're trying to grab onto?
There is no one single reason why people don't take their medications, and there's no one single thing that is going to make anyone take all their medications. If you look, for example, at the game, let's just take a totally different area, because tens of millions of people are planting fake crops as we speak who are not taking their medications that are much more important repetitive activity. Zynga, which is poisoning the civil world, is very well attuned both to this whole AB stuff, but also to behavioral psychology and behavioral economics. And what is it? And it's different people. There are different kind of people that are motivated by different kinds of things. Some are motivated by shame or guilt or fear. Some by a sense of accomplishment. These are the positive motivations in the sense that they will have an effect. Some people intellectually do not believe that their medications are helping them. So they need some education or convincing if they can be convinced. There are some people who simply need more feedback because, with high blood pressure or high cholesterol, these are both silent killers. You feel worse when you're on the medication than when you're not. And by the time you feel worse, it's too late. You're in the hospital. So the natural human feedback that we get from other things, if you exercise, you get the feedback that you're stronger and you feel better. If you take your blood pressure medication, you don't feel better. But you could get feedback by seeing what your numbers are and how your behavior affects your numbers. Or maybe a study or some encouragement from your family that they're glad that you're going to live longer. So there's an element of missing feedback. That's another one. And it's often different for different people. Some people are living for their family, and they need their family to tell them that they're important. Other people have a financial
So
expense.
is your approach more of a platform, you would say, where you're trying to, if you could learn or parse the individual habits of individual people or the individual inclinations of individual people, that you can personalize the PillJogger to them?
Yes, that's the goal. One of our old slides said that everything that works. We're not doctrinaire. If someone comes up with a better theory of how to incentivize people through coupons or cash payments or a text message or someone blaming them for something, we'll do our best to put it on the platform.
So let me take this to Rashaun now. You're seeing a lot of the behaviors that are on the other side of the fence, so to speak. Actually, why don't you speak to adherence for a second? Are you seeing anything about adherence in your conversation, chatter, or Twitter, or whatever you want to call it? Question box? I don't know what you call that.
It's needle.
In the needle, okay. And if not, what are the key things that you're seeing? What are the concerns of the people who are prescribing the medicines?
I think Pharma was really surprised at the types of questions that providers had. They skew toward the outcomes end of the spectrum. So I started a company in Minnesota, which is where I was living before I got into the incubator in New York. Minnesota has a high Somali population in the city of Minneapolis. We got this flurry of questions from a variety of pharmacists about education materials that could be translated into Somali. So one pharma company stepped up and provided a booklet that a pharmacist that is doing MTM with patients who are illiterate can actually scratch off the FACES scale so that as they come back for follow-up, the provider can actually track how they've been progressing with their pain management. I mean, think about all of the obstacles when you're dealing with a translator to even deal with the patient. The patient can't speak English, the patient can't write their native language, but you're prescribing a narcotic because they've had a surgery. Pharma companies were very surprised. We started with an inner city hospital. So there's a lot of questions about translation, a lot of questions about ACOs, what resources could be brought to bear, questions about best practices. What are other institutions that are facing this same challenge doing? Healthcare providers know these drug companies are calling on institutions around the country. Why reinvent the wheel? I mean, if we could establish or reestablish some level of trust between healthcare professionals and pharma has a lot to offer. I'm trying to think of some other really cool questions.
I can tell you I'm relieved to hear that the doctor's first concern was the outcomes.
Yeah, I think pharma was really surprised. I think pharma expected...
Pharma was surprised.
Pharma was surprised because they expected that everything would be like cut and dry. Like most of the questions that a doctor has about a drug, they can reach with a pharmacist on staff. But pharmacists still are the point of contact between the drug industry and the institution. And there's a lot of questions that pharmacists have that are not cut and dry. And we captured a lot of those questions just about, we captured more questions from generalist pharmacists than specialty pharmacists. So we were a little bit surprised by that. But when we interviewed the specialty pharmacists, we found that most of them had on their speed dials the medical liaisons of the companies that, so if you're a cardiologist, pharmacist on the cardiology unit, 5 companies, main companies, you have those medical liaisons on your speed dial. Again, got us thinking, how do we use technology to connect every single healthcare professional, whether it's a GP in the outpatient setting or a specialist, with the brightest mind in pharma to get their expert question answered.
And what are they, let's get back to adherence now. Adherence, obviously, for the patient has a huge value.
Yeah.
For the provider, let's assume that they are indeed really focused on outcomes and therefore it has huge value. For the pharma company, it's really their bottom line. If patients aren't filling prescriptions, the pharmaceuticals aren't getting sold. Where's their outlook on this issue of adherence?
So the story that I like to tell is like if it's 1970 and you are opening an organic market, do you go to Ames, Iowa, or do you go to Berkeley, California? We're dealing with the most progressive pharma companies right now, and just in the past several months, we found that Bristol Myers Squibb, along with Pfizer and Novartis, appear to be very, very progressive in understanding that the entire healthcare economy has changed. It used to be, as someone said here, take this pill, call me in the morning. It's not that anymore. You've got institutions that are integrating genomics testing and proteomics testing. You've got all of these diagnostics. These capital expenditures are affecting which drugs can be prescribed, which drugs can be tested for. Pharma is going to have to embrace the outcomes. The outcomes can be adherence, but a lot of the outcomes in the institution have to do with, as we're reinventing this protocol, how should we do it? How do we safeguard ourselves against making a decision now that we'll pay for in 5 years because, two systems don't talk to each other. But in terms of adherence, that's very much on the individual level. Yes, the providers asked a lot of questions about pill boxes and reminders, apps. Pharma is really interesting right now. Pharma is, I think you're going to see pharma go on a buying spree with apps very soon, because to your point about behavior change and to your point back there, there's a lot of game mechanics that can be used to inspire individual behavior change, right? To your point, Gil, we're all motivated by different things, but we always have these phones, these tablets on us. Pharma, as we're talking, they're getting very interested in what's going to be the combination of app plus drug in the future so that they can play their role in helping the patient actually adhere, connect the patient to a social network of other patients that are going through the same thing that they're going through, and also connect that patient to a medical expert that may be able to answer a question about side effects. I just want to add one more thing. There's a company in New York called Haptique. They are curating the first dedicated medical app marketplace, and they're going to a bunch of hospitals in New York. They're a startup too, and they're saying, look, the way that you manage drug formularies today, you're going to manage app formularies very soon. Patients are already asking doctors and pharmacists, which app should I use for weight loss or psychiatry or smoking cessation? What do you recommend? What are the standards? The FDA said that for the vast majority of apps that don't involve diagnosis, they're not going to even evaluate them. That's 80% plus. They're only going to evaluate the ones that involve diagnosis. So how are you as providers going to choose? How are you going to get your questions answered about the various evaluation standards on the apps, and how are you going to make an informed suggestion to your patient? I would predict you guys are going to see a lot more integration with pharma plus app, the drug plus the app, to help the patient be adherent and manage side effects.
Let me do a little change of topic over here. Oh, I'm sorry. If it's can we come back to it in a minute?
Sure.
And then, let me. There were a couple of things I want to cover, and then I will definitely open it up to everybody in the audience here. So, just one other thing I want to touch on for all of you, but particularly for Rashaun, Gil, and then Nancy also. Although I'm imagining I know the answer for Nancy, but maybe I don't. Is for a lot of revolutionary technologies, what's your business model? Who's going to buy and why are they going to pay for it? And how are you going to get it out there and deploy it to scale?
I'll answer ours quickly. Pharma spends $50 billion on salespeople that most of you in the room aren't really meeting with. They are losing patents on big blockbuster drugs. The new drugs that are emerging tend to be niche drugs that are not going to require large sales forces. Technology offers the ability for you as a provider to connect with an expert in pharma without meeting them in person through your tablet or your iPhone or whatever app you're using.
So the providers have a subscription to this, or
No, Pharma fully funds it
Pharma funds it? And
because it's a net savings for them
Right.
over deploying.
they're in the
people
marketplace,
flood.
basically, so this
The
is.
providers shouldn't have to pay for getting the most up-to-date information from the drug companies when all of these experts, your peers, are in the drug companies.
How about you,
So-
Gil?
Well, we have one business development person who is dealing with pharmacies and drug companies, another with insurers, and our CEO is out meeting retailers, and we'll see who wins.
Unholy alliance there, you know, pharma companies.
We may
and-
have to go with
payers.
whoever chooses us first, if there's a conflict. There are a lot of people who have a stake in adherence and more broadly in outcomes, keeping people alive out of the hospital, reducing medical care, and some of them are having to change their own models about what they pay for and how. So there's certainly a back pressure of a problem that needs a solution, and figuring out exactly how it's going to be monetized, whether it's a direct sale of software or a per user fee or a license, or even a sponsorship situation. We're working that out, but we're contemplating charging people who have a really well-defined cost issue, savings or money to be made, a subscription fee per patient that's based on the return to them that we can prove.
So this would be, when you say per patient, that is, therefore it's probably now not a provider, right? You're talking payer, you're talking...
Yes, most likely payer. I mean, it's hard to figure out who the
Oh, it
payer
is?
is
Okay.
because
So
you
you're-
pay your insurance company, I pay you.
So if I may summarize, you will build it and they will come.
We're going to
Sorry, I didn't mean to be so harsh, but...
They will talk.
Well, you know. Okay, and I'm going to pass it to Nancy, a quick chance to answer, and then Scarlett, maybe you can also tell us a little bit about the financial challenges here. But Nancy first.
So we have a couple mechanisms. We are launching our first product at the end of this year in the UK, and the model for that will be basically people in the UK can go to their pharmacy, and when they get their prescriptions, they can choose to get the prescription Proteus pack, which will have patches and will have our enabled pills in there. And there will be a subscription fee. The consumer will pay it. We're not going through insurance or anything. The philosophy behind that is we're providing a valuable customer service, and if we make it good, people will pay for it. It's targeting people who are managing chronic diseases, both so they can manage their data and they can share it with their caretakers or doctors or other people who might be interested to kind of relieve that burden of making sure that they're okay, helping people live independently.
So they get the Proteus embedded pill with their regular prescription and they pay for the patches.
Yeah.
So let me challenge that a bit, or answer that. If people already have trouble just buying pills, what do you think they're going to do with patches on top of it?
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
How much is it gonna
Yeah,
cost?
so this model does require a certain amount of engagement to begin with, and it's what we're launching with first. We're not sure if it's perfect or not yet. We'll find out. We are going down other avenues as well. We have partnerships with pharma companies because they're interested in this technology. You know, the ones who embrace the fact that the traditional model won't continue to work forever. You can't stop technology. Things are going to change. We're also in the consumer space. We're licensing our technology to body media. So from a strictly consumer sort of fitness market, we're looking at that as well. Where we're making money off
the
our hardware.
narcissistic ones who want to know everything about themselves.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or, you know, the ones ahead of the curve.
But financially, I mean, if I may extrapolate a little bit from what both of you said, and certainly what Rashaun said, all roads are leading back to pharma, basically.
I wouldn't necessarily say it all has to come from pharma. I mean, one of the big things is there's a huge, you know, multi-billion-dollar problem that we can try to solve preventatively with a lot of these systems. And if it's costing all this money, it means there's money in preventing it.
So it's everyone's problem, it's no one's problem. I mean, that's where it's the trying to use the comments, right? That's where we are. I mean, we'd all be better off if everyone took their meds, right?
But there's a big role for payers as well,
Yeah.
and even some self-insured employers. You know, Safeway is famous for its various programs.
But there you have the tension. You know, what's good for pharma is not good for payers. So there, you got to decide which side you're going to play on. You can't be on both teams.
Let me think about that.
I kind of feel like there's,
Paid for non-use.
this kind of goes into the the overarching, like, do you want to make money or do you want to be altruistic? And I think there are paths to align those two goals, to make the altruistic goals match up with the goals that will make you money. And making people healthier is one of those.
I can tell what decade you were born in, Nancy. I appreciate that. So, sorry. Was the traffic on the way here? So, Scarlett, can you tell us a little about the financial incentives here and how they stacked up and what it took to make that kind of investment in the new technology, in the 21st century technology for pharma? I mean, sorry, I meant Scarlett.
For pharma, you mean?
Yeah, your whole system
Mine-
and what were some of the issues there?
Okay. It was a lot of money, I'll say that, I'm sure. But I will tell you, building it in a new space, I was able to do it for a lot less and bring in a lot more equipment than if I tried to remodel an old building. So that was nice. How we did it brought this in, because I mean it's out in the public. We spent $15 million putting this pharmacy together. I sold it to the C-suite. I will save that much money on basically one lawsuit by avoiding one lawsuit, which is what it does. You know, we didn't try to sell it on less staff because, believe me, it doesn't take less staff. They asked me about the IV robot. What could I do to improve it? Well, have the robot actually go over to the box picker, get the drug out, stock itself, come back, and then when it needs to be clean, clean itself. Because I still have to have people to do all those parts. It's not self-sufficient. But to caveat on the comment of, sorry to say that you're going after the consumer, that does concern me because a lot of the problem, I work also retail pharmacy for friends in my hometown down south. And the biggest problem we have is people can't afford their meds. Insurance companies are paying less and less. But I think if we could show insurance companies or provider that avenue, if we can show, or you could find out whether or not these people are actually taking their meds, and if they're not taking their meds, then maybe their insurance rates are different, you know, the tiered kind of insurance plan, it would be more incentive for patients to do it. That might be
It's like your driver's record, okay? So people
Yeah.
have a pill-taking record, and if you've got more than so many points, then
Well, you know,
insurance rates
well,
go
insurance
up.
companies have said this for years. If you're not a healthy person, you're obese and you fall on all these other lines, your insurance rate should probably be higher than someone who's healthy, fit, and everything else. Now, does that mean yes or no? Is it really right? But the statistics are there, so. That gentleman in the back has had his hand up all day. All right, let's start.
Stand.
There you go.
So I was actually going to bring up the insurance issue. So how many people in this room are self-insured or don't have insurance? Self-insured or have or don't have insurance. So self-insurance is basically you have to pay for yourself and without, right? So it's 30 to 40% of the money. So I was going to say that I think we're missing one of the points in adherence is, one, most people don't know why they should be here. I know a doctor who takes her, we won't mention names, but who takes her hypertension medicine when she starts to feel headaches. And that's a doctor, right? That's a doctor.
They're just
That's not that uncommon. Physicians, sorry physicians, but I work with all of you and I love you all, but they are the worst for taking their medications.
I'm
They
just
really
saying,
are. So,
you know, knowledge, whatever reasons you want to put in all this, there are people who are 100% knowledgeable that, as I said, I personally have somebody in my household who's a physician who I have to remind them every day to take their hypertension medicine because otherwise you get headaches in 3 or 4 days, right? The second question is, it's an economic component, which is what you're talking about, because the fact of the matter is they just recently did a study on seniors where the donut that, we won't mention any political parties, the Republicans put in, that basically means that anybody who hits the donut, you know, it pays for the first $1,500, doesn't pay for the next 3,000 pharmaceuticals, and then picks it up again at $5,000, means that when they hit the hole, they stop being adherent because it's a choice between eating and paying $100 a month in medications becomes a huge factor in the decision making as to what you decide to do and how you take care of yourself. Once you start adding 3, 4, or 5 meds to the process, it really becomes a function of these issues. So I guess my question is, how much have you guys thought about policy behavior and socioeconomic factors in all of these discussions, because I would tell you that a big function isn't just whether or not the meds in your house or what you feel like doing, but again, whether I can afford the drugs, you know, what is the impact, for example, on health insurance companies of poor adherence versus adherence in terms of avoided hospital stay? Because Geetha, you mentioned there's a tension between payers and physicians, but they've shown that if you take the pill, it's still cheaper for an insurance company for them to pay for the pills than it is for you to go and have surgery or taken care of. Right?
Right. So this is sort of a social question, and it's always hard for entrepreneurs to, despite what Nancy said, it's hard for entrepreneurs to, or any one company to try to boil the ocean over there. And I think you said it early on in your talk, that there are hard problems, there are easy problems, and you're going to try and please tackle the easy problems. But I guess, let me paraphrase some of the point that Mark was making, is that, are we focusing on the wrong thing here? Is the real elephant in the room the affordability? Or what is it? I mean, or you know,
it's a combination of things. But I mean, I'll speak from personal experience. My insurance company just decided to stop paying for one of my medications. Well, if I don't take that medication, the other medication I do take can cause cancer. So I went after the insurance company and said, "What are you doing? You know, in 6 years you're going to be treating me for cancer, and it's going to cost you a lot more. Why would you do this?" So I'm having to provide...
What was their answer?
Well, I'm in the process of providing umpteen's number of pieces of documentation. My physician's trying to provide documentation, literature, so that they can see this. Because people who are in insurance companies, unfortunately, are making decisions about something they know nothing about.
Well, that's, yes. And the short-term thinking that you're going to be in their plan on average for 18 months, you know, between 1 year or 2 years.
I've been on their plan for 6 years, so you
Right.
know, I don't
You're long-term,
Yeah,
you're a
long-term.
lifetime as far as they're concerned. Yeah, that's part of it. So we're kind of, it's always a multi-headed problem. And I mean, I want to say, I applaud the efforts of everyone here trying to push pharma into the new era and push the boundaries out in all cases. And I know in some cases you don't always know where you're going to land, but hopefully you'll all land in good places. So, okay, I reckon.
So I think there's another paradigm, and that is the emerging of alternative medicine.
Yeah.
And I think last year, from what I heard, or 2010, that for the first time alternative medicine actually surpassed conventional medicine. And I think that also playing a huge role on why people are not going to take their regular pills, and also the other type of information they're getting on the media, that for example only 4% of cross-drug based medication is actually help only 4% of the population that they take it.
Yeah.
So all this kind of messages come from different direction, and I think that even changes the whole dilemma. I think for Nancy sort of point, and I think alternative medicine, having that kind of stuff filled into your vitamins, for example, would be gets much more to the consumer market, because we want to know if that vitamin D really works or doesn't work. Whereas with my cross-drug, I wouldn't know about it until
That's a really good thought. That it's the self-care market, or the self-prescription market, if you will, that's probably much more interested in tracking the effect of. You have a comment on that, or?
Yeah, actually, I think it kind of fits in with what Gil was saying earlier about feedback. And basically our traditional health system, you know, where you get prescribed a drug, like you said, there are big problems, and I'm not surprised that people don't trust the medications that they're taking and just don't take them, because they don't work for most of the people in many cases. So I think systems of technology that give you that feedback, that can actually tell you, you know, this is working, this isn't working. If you can get consumers to trust what they're taking, they're much more likely to want to participate. And it kind of fits in with the whole holistic medication as well, because our healthcare system also just looks at you and says, you should take this, you need to take this, it doesn't matter why, do it. And increasingly people have access to information, and they want to be part of that. You know, they don't want to sit there and be talked down to and told, this is what's best for you, I know, like, don't give me any more information, just listen. They want to
know which decade she was born in. Sorry.
There are more and more of us.
I know. And we're counting on you to take care of us, so. screwed up the world, right? So I appreciate that. I mean, would you consider apps an alternative form of alternative medication? I mean, in some, you know, if it's ultimately creating better health, you know, so the antique that Rashaun mentioned is probably a paramount to.
There's no question that if you're seeking behavior change, apps are, I would say, the low-hanging fruit. I would encourage all of you to talk to your patients about what apps they're using. Not just medical apps, but apps in general. The convergence between the time that people are spending in the digital sphere and their health, it's coming. More and more of these, I mean, even something as Farmville. Like, there's people that spend a lot of time each day using Farmville. What if there were a reminder in Farmville to take your medication? What if you turned that on because you knew that you had a vested interest and you wanted a reminder, whether it was a text message or a message in Farmville? I think you got to really push your patients to help you understand how are they interacting with technology, because with their cell phones in their pockets all the time, if you want to drive behavior change, that's an opportunity to do so.
There was a question back there. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I have this idea of where I know you're maybe not into like hearing government solutions instead of technology, but the affordability, which I still think is the elephant in the room. I was thinking in terms of like how we pay farms not to grow food sometimes. How about if we pay pharma if they're able to reduce the need for a pill? You know, like, because they make all this money. They're thinking money, a lot of them.
Right. So there's actually a. I heard this at the J.P. Morgan conference earlier this year about.
Oh, good. Bankers.
What's that?
Bankers, I said.
Bankers. No, but it was actually I think it was a presentation by Mark McClellan, who used to be the former commissioner at the FDA. One of the examples he gave of new models was, precisely speaking to that, was, I believe it's a reimbursement model for a particular, I think it's hypertension drug, and the name escapes me, and I'm sure you can look it up, where the reimbursement model is, there's a very low baseline reimbursement, and as the health outcomes are tracked and proven, the reimbursement goes up. So this is where they're paid to put their money where their mouth is, basically, and if they say a patient needs X dosage prescription or X level of prescription, if the pharma says that, they have to prove that that's what's appropriate for the patient in terms of outcomes before they get reimbursed. So it's a risk-based reimbursement or an outcomes-based reimbursement model.
Well, I had a question for him, but now I have a question for you. I mean, the pharma company doesn't touch the patient. So how can the pharma company be held accountable
this is exactly where all of the tracking technologies come into play.
So now we have big pharma coming into your brain, your black
so
eye.
here we go, build it and they will come,
I
right?
can't see that happening.
So now pharma companies, but that's...
Well, I just want to add, I really, and with all my heart, I do not think that healthcare professionals should demonize big pharma. Yeah, they paid my bills for 7 years and helped me pay down my student loans, but a lot of your peers are in pharma. There's a lot of good people in pharma, and they have a lot of resources that unfortunately are going to waste because the companies are slowly dying. What we're chasing with Needle is the emerging stakeholders in pharma, which happen to be compliance and regulatory and medical affairs. I think you're going to find a sea change happen soon in pharma. Most big pharma companies are run by guys like me that carried a bag and rose the ladder, salespeople. Pharma is driven by sales, but the change is happening. The DIA conference, Drug Information Association, medical affairs is rising, and I think that all of you that might have cynicism about pharma, I hope that changes as you see more of your peers rise in pharma, as the customer-facing person in pharma becomes one of your peers, a PhD, a PharmD, an MD, versus a salesperson. I hope that changes, because ultimately it's the same pot of money. It's money from your institution that's going to pharma. It's money from employers and insurance companies going to pharma. The best possible way we can solve our problems in healthcare is if you guys can recoup some more value from pharma, because pharma is still cash rich and very resource rich. But you know, engagement is always better than antagonism. And so I think, you know, that's just from an ex-pharma guy who does feel a lot of values in
open season on anyone we can do in anesthesia. So it wasn't reserved for pharma anyway. But there was a question here.
My question is somewhat related actually. We talked about pharma, we talked about insurers, we talked about consumers, but what's the role of government in this? Because the government is talking about citizens' health. Citizens, unless the citizens are healthy, it has a direct impact on the economy, the GDP, and all that stuff. So where is the government coming in here?
It depends on whether you're red or blue, I guess.
I'll say from our end,
Yeah.
we've been contacted by several public health agencies that are very interested in the stream of questions that we're generating from one hospital in Minnesota. What's on healthcare professionals' minds? Could this be a form of an early alert system if we're observing questions about adverse events? There's definitely a lot of interest from the government for saying, how can we apply some level of transparency to the questions that healthcare professionals have? And if we notice any types of trends, is there a way for us to be proactive? Is there a way for us to correlate questions with inappropriate marketing by pharma? But the big thing is the early alert possibility. We have questions about adverse events come in all the time. We have a protocol for how we deal with those because pharma has FDA guidelines about how they deal with those. But ultimately, that's a good thing.
But I think the question was not just about the part of the government that provides healthcare, not the public hospitals and the public healthcare systems, but I'm guessing the broader role of policy and legislative policy that the first question was asked. If someone wants to answer that real quickly, Scarlett, maybe if you have a thought, that's great. Otherwise, I'll go to one more question, and then I think we may have time for one last question after that. So you're next.
Great. I just wanted to reflect on the robotic pharmacy for a minute. I really applaud you for doing that, even though it's expensive. Having been a victim of a therapeutic mixed adventure as a physician, I had a patient who was on Roxanol, and next morning was breathing 4 to 6 times a minute. Was fairly arousable. And when we look back, what happened was the Roxanol was actually something in a bottle that the nurse then diluted in the nursing station. Well, a lot of conversations going around and a lot of distraction. And what's interesting to me is there's a lot of stuff that happens, I think, at the bedside that could benefit from automation, particularly that kind of maneuver. Question, how do you handle that kind of stuff at UCSF at the bedside? And have you seen any kind of robotic devices or automation that might deal with that, the nurses having to mix drugs or what have you? Because I was shocked, actually, when I saw
California
that
state
happen.
legislation, nurses are not allowed to mix at the bedside unless it's an emergent situation. So our nurses do not mix or compound anything. The only time they can do it, like I said, is an emergency situation, a code where it doesn't come in a form that you can administer directly.
Now, this happened about 7 years ago.
Yeah, but pharmacists attend every single one of our codes, so we're a little bit different. We have a huge pharmacy staff. I know there's still compounding that goes on. There's 2 companies that I know of that now have a device that you hook onto the IV tubing line that, and I don't know all the technical terms. It reads some kind of wave system, and it can tell you exactly what that drug is and the concentration of the drug. They're still working on it to get it foolproof. I mean, there's still some variances to it, but that would be something that would be worthwhile. I will tell you, on the pharmacy side of that, it scares the living daylights out of me having the nurses have that available to them, because right now, if I make a concentration of a drug and it's 4.99% or 4.99 milligrams per ml concentration, and it's supposed to be 5 milligrams, I'm allowed a 5%, we allow a 5% variance. The industry allows 10% variance. That nurse will bring that back to me and ask me to remake it, So there's always a little variance. You have to have a little bit. But I think that taking compounding out of someone's hand who doesn't really understand compounding or know it, can be distracted, it's not in the right environment, is definitely a plus. And it needs to be done in a controlled environment, sterile, whether even it's oral. We do all of our sterile compounding in a controlled clean room. Not to the extent of an IV clean room, but it's still a controlled environment.
Can I ask us quickly,
Sure.
Outcomes, since we're interested in outcomes. I know you spent $50 million. Are you tracking to see if you actually reduced adverse drug events that were related to the kinds of things that were happening in the pharmacy that you've automated?
Yes, we look at our compounding, whether or not the right dose is going out, how frequently there's still a compounding error. I will tell you, the robot unfortunately doesn't make mistakes unless you garbage in, garbage out. You put the wrong data in, the wrong data comes out, but continuing. We have incredible checkpoints. Everything is sent out and tested for stability and qualitative and quantitative analysis before it's allowed to be compounded. We still do a lot of manual stuff, so that's an issue for us. Dispensing. Now, adverse drug reactions are a little bit different than your dispensing errors necessarily, or your I forgot to take it or didn't get to take it or I took too much. More your adverse drug reactions are polypharmacy. And that we've always run and done statistics on outcome measures for that. We look at it through our database. When a pharmacist is entering the orders, now we're going to CPOE, which is a physician order entry. Pharmacists still have to verify all the orders. They have to manage the patient's profile and look to see what drugs can be mixed together, what drugs can't. So that's where we hopefully will reduce the adverse drug reaction.
Yeah, I was just hoping that maybe you've had a mortality decrease of some kind.
A mortality? I can't say that at this point.
How long have you been running this?
The robotic pharmacy, we went live October 5th of 2010. Okay, so let me wrap up. We're just about at the end with one last question to all of you. So let's just start in the same order. We'll start with you, Scarlett. What's the most exciting thing as you're looking forward, and what do you think is going to be the biggest challenge? I think probably the most exciting thing is the safety aspect of what we're doing. We've taken, the more you move the human element out of it, I hate to say this, the safer that it actually gets when it's done by a robot that can't say, oh, I don't want to do it that way today, I want to do it this way. So that piece to me is very exciting. I won't say it's the scariest part, but probably the biggest challenge I think that's out there is we're a big institution, we can afford this, and we're putting standards in place that your small community hospital or community pharmacy cannot do and stay alive. And what are we going to do? We're going to reduce it down to a monopoly of certain hospitals in certain areas. That scares me a little bit.
Interesting thought-provoking there. Rashaun?
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity is converting pharma into being partners in patient care. When I was in pharma, I could tell my leadership what those of you who are healthcare professionals were telling me about our drugs, and a lot of times people didn't care. They'd say, we focus group this with 1,500 doctors, and they said X, so we don't care what you said. Once you unlock user-generated content, and it's fully transparent what providers are asking about, it's no longer going to be possible for pharma not to be held accountable to serving your needs. So I think that's a huge opportunity. It's my opportunity to make right on a lot of stuff that I did as a hustling drug rep.
I can see you as a hustling drug rep.
Oh yeah. North Dakota, remember.
I got friends there.
And then biggest challenge is dealing with pharma. I think the generational shift that's happening with healthcare professionals is in our favor, in that younger healthcare professionals feel free about asking questions and generating content online. But pharma is not currently built for an environment that is clinician focused,
Right.
and they're definitely not built for personalized medicine yet. So I think this is a case where healthcare professionals are moving faster than pharma, and that's going to be a challenge. How do you've got these multi-billion-dollar companies that are very sales and marketing and messaging heavy.
Right.
How do you get them to respond to this new healthcare economy? It's a big challenge. we need pharma to catch up with healthcare because I don't think that you guys can do it alone, and you guys deserve better. So.
Okay. Nancy.
Well, I think technology is the new awesome thing, but the reason for that is I think in general we really underestimate the patient. Like we kind of have this mindset of they need to be taken care of, like they're not taking their meds, like how dare I do that? And we're not giving them the right tools yet, but now we have the technology to give them the right tools, the right feedback, have them collect the information on their own in a way that actually lets them know what is making them healthier, what is really wrong, so they can start trusting the system. And once we give them the right tools, people will want to engage. It's just, the system doesn't work like that now. We don't consider their psychology, their needs, things like that. And I think the big problem is it's hard. It's a huge technical problem, both everything from hardware up to the applications, how you engage with them, how you get the dopamine in their system to make them want to take their pills. It's not easy. So, we're not going to build the perfect system right away. We won't have the perfect financial model on our first release, but people are building things, they're getting out there. We're testing, we're figuring out what people want. We're figuring out what works, and yeah, just build it. And eventually we'll get it right, and they will come.
So Gila, I'm going to ask you to reverse the answers because I want to end on an up note. So what's your biggest, what do you think is a big challenge? And you don't, tell us a couple and then let's talk about what you're most excited about.
Okay, well, there are a couple big challenges that are both money. I mean, the entire healthcare system has a big financial challenge due to the cost and access to care, and whichever side wins in the Supreme Court, healthcare is too expensive, it's not available to a lot of people, and it's costing a lot of people a lot of money. And what I refer to as the hard problems are things that really can't be done without some fundamental changes or some policy.
The government issues.
Either government, I mean, it's sort of like looking at water getting higher and higher in a lake. I'm not an expert, I really am not I don't have a doctrine about that. But you see sooner or later, something, it can't keep getting higher, something's going to have to change, whatever it is. And in the same way, there are a lot of, as a company, we're dealing with major enterprises with interesting financial stakes that want to preserve their profits, but are having a lot of trouble. So, unlocking that, seeing that certain things are in the financial interest of a payer or an employer or a patient, but there are also financial reasons why they just can't do it, institutional reasons. And we have to either break down some of those barriers or overcome them, or they have to change some of their ways of doing business. On the positive end, software technology and consumer technology and product design. 30, 40 years ago, computers were these big, ugly devices that only engineers could understand, and they were noisy and, well, not smelly, but they just weren't something you would use. And even back then, chairs were uncomfortable and cars were nasty. I mean, today's standards, things are designed with consumers in mind. And when you realize that a patient, for the most part, is a consumer of healthcare and is capable of making intelligent decisions, or can be incented if they just have the right things in front of them, I think it could potentially be a better world if people are empowered. And that is one of the few areas where I think all the enterprises are on the same side, because they don't really want to pay the hospitals to take care of patients. They want the patient, as much as possible, to have the tools.
So let me end with one final thought here, and I'm going to take a comment that Scarlett made early on about how she got her project through, which was, and then what was easier about it was to start from scratch, was to essentially reimagine and reconfigure the whole pharma and dispensing. I'm just wondering if it's going to take one of these technologies with their huge potentials to essentially reconfigure our somewhat dead-ended and dysfunctional sort of deadlock that we're in between the pharma, the payer, the patient, dysfunction, and hopefully the physicians as well, and that all parties are just going to essentially have to realign with some incentives. So, thank you all very much, and let's give our panelists a round.
Thank you for coming.
And see you next month.
Tell your friends.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you guys again.